look at what Zynga's doing and how they're starting to vertically integrate top down from not only the acquisition of the M&A side and the types of companies that are acquiring, but now they've already been pretty transparent that they want to build an ad network, and then within the last month have actually purchased a company by the name of Chartboost. You're starting to see ad networks that are starting to become publishers, and we obviously have AppLovin and IronSource.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Craft Podcast. I am John and I am joined by my co-host Veronica.
Hello.
And she will introduce our guest today.
Yes, so we're very excited to be talking craft today with our guest, Stephen Saiz. So Stephen is currently the head of growth marketing at Amazon Games. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me, Veronica. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. And if we're talking craft with you, what would you say, if someone were to ask you, is your craft?
So my craft is, the simplest form is to just say that I'm a data-driven marketer. And usually they can kind of decipher what that means. But it's evolved from, direct marketing to performance marketing. And now we really refer to it as growth. Because that's kind of the underpinning of growing user bases, growing businesses, growing audiences. So yeah, my craft, I would say at its core is being a very data-driven marketer, setting frameworks, really digging into making sure that you're getting return on the money that you're investing in trying to build audience or whatever you're trying to achieve.
And I know we're excited to talk to you a lot more about data-driven marketing, but before we dig in a little more there, just zooming out for a second, wonder, what's been your career journey in a nutshell? How did you get started in all this? Were you a young boy dreaming of growing up and entering performance marketing?
Every moment of my early childhood, I dreamt of going pro in performance marketing. I played on the AAU circuit, decided to pick my college career on the best performance marketing team. So yes, no, in all seriousness, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. Did my undergrad at Berkeley, majored in psychology and mass communications, and graduated and really started to look around and realize that being an agitator and a punk was not a career. So what were the best ways to use my degrees? And it naturally gravitated towards a career in marketing and a career in advertising specifically. So out of undergrad, started to work for an advertising agency, did that for a couple of years. It was a direct response agency. So that's where I kind of got my first taste for kind of what was just called direct marketing at the time, but what was really the underpinnings of what performance marketing and growth is today. I did that for a couple of years, realized that I didn't like being on the agency side. I wanted to be more on the client side. So I jumped over to work at a horse racing track called Santa Anita Park in Arcadia, California. It was the top horse racing park in the nation. And the team that I joined there as a marketing analyst was also very database driven, direct marketing driven. So just kind of everything that I'd learned up to that point just kind of continued and just kind of rolled along. And most of the senior team there were all MBAs. So they were the ones that really convinced me to go that route as well. So I ended up applying to USC's Marshall School of Business and joined there, got accepted into their MBA program and did that while also switched jobs and went to go be an analyst over at Earthlink, which is a blast name from the past, which was one of the original internet service providers that was competing with AOL in the time. Did that for a couple of years as an individual contributor and finished my MBA and really wanted to be in technology, really wanted to focus on mobile specifically. And the reason was, as part of my MBA program, was able to go to Japan back in 2003 and really start to see what mobile was going to become in the West, because you just kind of could see it starting to really become something as they were using their smartphones at the time. They were, streaming live TV, five stories below on the subway. And I just knew and was fascinated that that's kind of where I wanted to be. So I was able to find a job at a little ragtag company called Disney and joined their mobile gaming company or mobile gaming division, and joined them as a kind of manager of strategy and analytics. And ultimately rose to the head of worldwide marketing within a couple of years, really overseeing the entire portfolio of mobile games that we were offering at the time. Saw the transition from feature phones and selling ringtones and wallpapers, and when customers were actually buying mobile games for $5.99 or subscribing to them for $2.99, working with the individual carriers, and then really overseeing that shift and replacing that revenue with smartphone revenue, building relationships with the Apples and Googles of the world, and ultimately launched Disney's first 50 or so mobile apps and mobile games. The last game that I launched with Disney was a little game called Where's My Water, which was Apple's editor's choice and ended up doing, anywhere between 200 and 300 million downloads. And at the time was a top 25 mobile game of all time. So I decided to leave on a high note and joined another small gaming company, which was truly a small gaming company at the time, called Majesco Entertainment, really a boxed product video game publisher focused really on Nintendo DS and Wii at the time. And I came on to really build a digital business for them. And we did just that. So had some folks follow me from Disney over to there. We launched 5 titles. We got 2 Apple's Editor's Choices in that year and a half or so. So did that for a couple of years and then decided to go the startup route and joined a real money game company called B-Spot. And the reason why I ended up there is that B-Spot actually was using horse racing as its odds engine. And that's why they were able to be legal and we could actually take wagers on your phone, which was actually a pretty interesting kind of area to operate in. Did that for a couple of years and really just decided at that point to take a break and did some advising and consulting. At that point, I'd been working for about 25 years straight. And then I noticed that a few of my former colleagues in games started to make their way up, from everywhere to Seattle. And they were all joining another small ragtag company called Amazon that was trying to get into games, and flew up on one week in December, flew back down and had a message waiting for me that they were ready to make an offer, and did that back in 2017, and I haven't left. So we're still at Amazon, or I'm still at Amazon, really trying to build and get this games business off the ground. And I think we're really at the cusp now of really doing just that. So we've got a big AAA game called New World coming out in August. We've got a couple of other unannounced titles that will be coming out within the next kind of 12 to 18 months. And we're really, I think, kind of at that point where we're looking forward to seeing what we do or what we can do.
Oh, wow. Thank you for that stellar overview of your career journey. I mean, even just listening to it all makes me feel fatigued and wondering where's my water, oh my gosh.
It definitely has been a journey, that's for sure.
No, it's wonderful. And I will say, I'm glad to see that horse racing made an appearance at a few different moments. I was going to ask you if that's sort of a lens through which you now see everything and can't ignore.
It actually has a personal soft spot in my heart because I used to go to that track as a kid. And I do have an uncle that is Japanese that was actually born at that racetrack during the internment camps. So wow. He became a big fan of horse racing. He used to take me and my brother when we were kids. We always used to go very early and eat breakfast there and watch the horses and all that type of stuff. So it kind of was a family thing. So being able to work there was kind of a dream come true almost. And unfortunately, just the sport had not kept up with modern times and really wasn't doing a good enough job to really attract a newer, younger crowd. But if you look back, at one point, horse racing was the #1 sport in America. On a Wednesday, Absolutely. You would see 60,000 cars out in the parking lot going to the track. So it's a pretty phenomenal sport, pretty phenomenal industry. When you look at kind of returns and payouts, it's hard to beat what you actually can make off a $2 wager if it's the right combination of horses. So it's pretty interesting.
Well, speaking of tracks, I'll get us right back on track, John, and I will ask Stephen one question, which is that you describe your craft as data-driven marketing at its core. I think what interests you in this area, or what keeps you coming back to this area? This seems like it's been a real through line for you.
Yeah, every single job I've had has been analytics, data, problem solving. And, I think what spoke to me was, I've always been good at math. That was kind of my subject growing up and the easiest thing for me to grasp. And it's just always come naturally. So really applying that through the lens of the consumer. I'm always a people watcher. I'm kind of a lean back type of a have a personality that way. I'm not really an extrovert in that regard. So really applying both of them have really kind of been able to mesh, I think, a lot of my professional interests in terms of how do we reach consumers? How do we do it properly? How do I basically use marketing budgets, and I've managed some pretty massive marketing budgets in my time. But how do I treat that as my own money and just make sure I'm not spending wildly just because I can? And always applying that lens of how to be as disciplined and as strict, and just really kind of paying attention to the nuances of how spend happens, and really trying to put that puzzle together. And this, when I describe performance, you can apply performance to brand, and I think that's kind of where marketing is headed. Of really just trying to tell those stories with data, get the executive teams to understand why you're doing what you're doing, what the actual return they're getting is about. Just has always been phenomenal, or just keeps me engaged. It really just does. I kind of almost like puzzles, and just being a gamer in general. You want to kind of work through those situations, and kind of data-driven marketing kind of just scratches that itch for me in terms of how we think about it, how we approach it. Getting my teams really behind those frameworks and those philosophies has just kind of just been natural to how I've been able to grow in my career. And thankfully have taken that path, because like I said, I truly believe, the next CMOs are going to be really performance driven, are really going to be the ones that are driving strategy off the back of data. So that's kind of how I see it today.
Well, you talk about helping teams and companies sort of understand how you're measuring the performance. How do you help teams and companies understand really the ROI that you're after?
Yeah, so it's really about just explaining and getting them to understand the approach. And I know we're going to get into some topics later that kind of talk about some curveballs that are being thrown into the industry today. But like I said, I've been doing direct since 1997, and people have been doing direct response advertising for decades. And it's always been a component of a broader marketing mix, but that approach has been used to basically really get everybody aligned on, here's what we're doing, here's how we're spending, here's how we're measuring. So to me, it's about these mechanisms and frameworks that you can create. So it's really getting everybody to understand how you're going to measure, how you're going to make inferences where needed. Because again, data is still imperfect. It doesn't paint 100% picture. There's still cracks in the armor and things that you'll have to do to make some assumptions. But it's really getting everybody aligned on, what are those assumptions going to be? How are you going to approach it when maybe something doesn't go your way? But so you're not trying to make it up as you go, because I've found that the people that try to make it up as you go are the ones that fail, because you just lose credibility at that point. Where if you get that alignment going into a project, or going into a campaign, or just going into an annual spend, and everything kind of falls into plan, and you're meeting your numbers, and everything that you're doing kind of seems to align, you just build that trust and you build that credibility with that executive team, to the point where all of a sudden you get a lot more runway, you get a lot more budget, you start to just get a lot more freedom and latitude to take more risk, because it's still about risk, and it's still about testing and iterating and doing all the underpinnings and tactics of how you do all this stuff. But once you get that alignment and build that trust, it becomes a lot easier than if you're just trying to go at it alone and you don't really have a solid framework, or you don't have buy-in, because everybody's always going to question, how do you know? Or there's always going to be those additional things and hoops that you'll have to jump through along the way to justify what you did.
Well, sure, right. Who are the gatekeepers of your budget, and how do you bring them along with your mental model?
Totally.
And helping me understand your model, what are the key KPIs?
Yeah, so I mean,
not to double up on the K.
Yeah, for today and within games, it's a blend of a lot of different things. I mean, obviously user acquisition and whether it's a cost per user, cost per install, if you're talking about mobile, cost per sale. It's always about what that starting point is in the algebra, measured against what the return is and what the value of your customers are. So LTV is obviously a big component of that. Engagement, I think, is becoming one of those nuances that a lot more people are starting to focus on. What's retention? What's engagement? For me, I don't consider myself a marketer that just kind of brings customers to the front door of your house, wipes my hand of it, and says, I'm done. I want to make sure that these are quality customers. I want to make sure they're getting through the deeper part of the funnel. I want to make sure that they're staying there along the way. So those are kind of the main areas that we're focused on within the game side, is really looking at that long-term retention and engagement over time, in addition to cost and what it's going to get to that point. And it's getting people to understand that all of those things are variable, including the budget. So, a user that may cost $3 is going to be a lot different than a user that may cost $50. And again, once you set up that framework and have that trust to be like, yeah, it makes sense for us to go after those $50 customers, because they're ultimately going to turn into $200 or $300 customers, or whatever it may be. Adding new KPIs such as social value as well, that kind of starts to allow you to really understand how that cost actually spreads around. So for example, if you've got a user that maybe has an LTV of $10 and they bring on 10 of their $10 friends, looking at that customer as a $110 customer versus a $10 customer, because you might be focused on those higher value customers and dismiss them as a just not as valuable as a customer. But if you start to look at them in that lens of, well, they're actually bringing in an extra $100 in value because they're very high ambassadors or word of mouth, they're doing all the things virally that you want them to do, those are really the ones you really want, because then you're getting critical mass at that point, versus just focusing on those $100 players or whatever. So really trying to unpack everything and make sure that you're looking at all of the nuances at all angles at all times, to just make sure that you're analyzing the business properly.
I want to be one of your clients. I feel like you're so thorough and you're thinking of my money as your own. That sounds great. Yeah, John,
you have to.
I've been monopolizing Stephen here. Please.
Yeah, I've actually got a couple of comments before my question. So hopefully interesting comments for Stephen. Number one, between my time at Amazon and Facebook, I did some degenerate gambling on the blockchain, NFTs, all that jazz, meme stocks. And one thing I found, I'm not sure if you've seen it, you can check it out later, it's called Zed, which is a digital horse racing game built on blockchain. So you could buy horses I think the horse is an NFT. Anyways, if you're interested, check it out. Number two interesting comment is, in 2017, Zuck called video a megatrend. And since I work here now, I could call him Zuck. What I think is interesting is that it's funny, because I've interviewed you before. So I've been thinking a lot about your career, more than maybe an average person would about somebody else. So I think what makes your background interesting is you've straddled, in my opinion, two mega trends. One is obviously gaming, and even within gaming, I think mobile games is a mega trend in its own. And the second thing is, we'll call it in the bucket of data-driven marketing, which basically equals Facebook, Google, and everybody else. So when you're riding both of those waves, I feel like what's interesting, the takeaway I have is that I know you call yourself a data-driven marketer, but the language you speak really does sound like a general manager, in my opinion. Because I work with marketers all the time, whether it's at Amazon or in Facebook, and they're really just focused on the marketing craft, which is very specific, and nothing wrong with it. That's great. Now, that's the whole point of this podcast. But I think what's unique about your background is you're kind of approaching it like a GM. Maybe it's because of your startup experience or whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely envision myself longer term as, at Amazon, we use the term operator a lot. I definitely envision myself as an operator. I was a GM. I originally came in just as a VP of digital strategy and publishing, but within 6 months was promoted to the GM role, just because I don't just stick to the discipline itself. I do like to have a broader seat at the table. I do like to have a voice in strategy. I think it's important for me to be able to deliver on what I'm being asked to deliver on, that not being able to have a voice in terms of the strategy, the direction, the types of games, the types of monetization. I feel I'm pretty interchangeable in that regard. Maybe it's my AAU training back in the day. But overall, I think kind of for me, it's just one of the skills that I've been fortunate enough to have developed. And I think it's mainly because I've developed everything kind of on my own. I mean, I'm the first one in my family to go to college. Most of my family has been blue collar, but they've been managers. They've been general foremen on construction sites. They've been leaders. So I've seen what kind of at least body language and how you talk and work with employees and all that type of stuff. I did grow up around that type of environment versus kind of a white collar environment, but I think a lot of those skills have translated and really inspired and really laid a good foundation for the type of manager and ultimately the type of marketer that I become. So I think that's kind of just what you're seeing and what kind of exudes in terms of just how I run teams, how I think about the broader business. Again, I'm just not the type that's going to take a budget, focus on just the budget, and just say, again, like the example I gave before, wash my hands of it and just be like, you wanted me to spend $1 million here, I spent it, we delivered our numbers, and I go home. I want to know what that bigger picture looks like. Why do we only spend $1 million? What are we doing, and why can't we spend more? Why do we only have 2 games on the roadmap? Why can't we do 5? Or why aren't we, looking at these other developers? Why aren't we doing these other things? Why aren't we cross-platform? I think it's important to really piece those pieces together, because I think that's the value that I bring to the table. I think that's whenever I'm interviewing, it's the versatility, it's that bigger thinking. To me, that's kind of what you get with somebody like me that is, I think, pretty unique and pretty distinct versus folks that are just marketers and have only been, whether a creative marketer or even a direct marketer, because a lot of folks, unfortunately, that are data marketers have trouble communicating the data itself, and that's kind of where they struggle. They know all the math, they know how to do it, they know that, but they don't have that level up and that kind of managed up experience to really build that trust, and that's kind of where things typically will fall apart.
Perfect. I was spot on then in my analysis. So now we're gonna cover 2 topics. Because I think you have a lot of versatility. So we're gonna cover some big changes in mobile, which we talked about on this podcast before. We're gonna cover some mobile games topics, and then I'll pass over back to Veronica to get back into marketing. So iOS 14.5, as I mentioned before, it was something I just didn't really understand because I wasn't in the game or like in this field. And I've been starting to educate myself on this topic because it's a big change in the business, in the ads business. Maybe share some thoughts if you have around this change. And these are big questions like, hey, what's the high level impact on the industry? How are the other competitors potentially adjusting to it?
We're still obviously in the very early days, and I don't really think that we truly know yet what the overall impact, what that kind of long-term macro level impact is going to be yet. Obviously, privacy is needs to be managed differently, and kind of there needs to be a happy medium in terms of again, building that trust with customers, making sure they know that there's nothing nefarious going on with that data collection and all that type of stuff, and really just having a good grasp on what are the tools, what are the rules, what are the lanes that you can operate in. So I think that what Apple is trying to do, I think, is admirable, and we've been through this kind of with them before. And going back to like push notifications, and when those first came on the scene, people were kind of spammy, and the rules weren't really defined yet, and Apple kind of put a kind of squashed some of the kind of tactics that people were using. And at the end of the day, the way that I saw kind of companies adapt to getting a little bit smarter about how they were introducing when to allow push notification opt-ins to appear to customers, started to get smarter about at what point in that customer journey they started to do it at. And I think with kind of ATT and what Apple has kind of now launched is, I think that you're going to start to see a lot of adapting going on, specifically over the next probably 12 to 18 months, in terms of, developers at the end of the day are, they want the data, which we get, and they're going to need to convince customers that it's worth being tracked for. So what are you actually bringing to the table? What type of value, what type of benefits, what are you doing to really get customers to want to be part of your ecosystem, to want to log in, to want to opt into doing some of those things? And that's where I see, some of the bigger companies that are kind of prepping themselves for that future. You look at what Zynga's doing and how they're starting to vertically integrate top down from not only the acquisition on the M&A side and the types of companies that are acquiring, but now they've already been pretty transparent that they want to build an ad network, and then within the last month have actually purchased a company by the name of Chartboost. You're starting to see ad networks that are starting to become publishers, and we obviously have AppLovin and IronSource that have recently gone public or on the cusp of going public off the back of really converting third-party data to first-party data. So I think that's kind of one of the big shifts that we're going to see in the kind of next year or two, is companies that are really starting to think a lot bigger in terms of, how do they arm themselves with the right tools, the right approaches, the right strategies to really convince customers that, creating an account with them or doing something on that angle really is going to benefit them, because it's going to make their play with that company on their games that much better, because whether that's earning rewards or provide some other type of value, to me, that's where I kind of see us going. And then on the advertising side, again, we just don't know yet, because it's still a little early. So I know there's been guidance put out by a couple of companies, Snapchat being one of them, that, hey, this may have an impact on our top line revenue, because we just don't know if people are pulling out because they can't get the granularity that they're used to. But like I said, before, and how I started this out, direct marketing has been done for decades. And I think the smarter folks are going to figure out ways to make what's available work for them. And it's not going to be as easy as it has been over the last couple of years. Your company has made it very easy for not as sophisticated marketers to appear as very sophisticated marketers. And I think the ones that have been there before, the ones that have done it, the ones that haven't kind of grown up with the machines doing everything for them, are the ones that are really going to stand out over time, because they've had to be resourceful. They've had to think creatively. They've had to take a more assumption-based approach to making sure that the spend and the data and everything works to tell that story and paint that picture of return and value and all those things. So again, from my perspective, I think you're gonna start to see some separation between the folks that are just going to be like, yeah, this is our new normal, and we're just going to figure out a way to succeed. And then you're going to have the other folks that are just not going to know where to start, because they were just used to pressing one button and letting everything happen for them.
One more question for me before I turn over to Veronica. First of all, thank you for telling me about, or explaining to me, what AppLovin was maybe 2 years ago. I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand the concept of why like an ad network would get into the acquired machine zone. I just didn't get why, but I understood because of what you told me, and I purchased an IPO, which typically is not good for retail investors, but as of today, it's doing pretty good. It dampened some of my losses from my degenerate gambling. So, final question here is: you already talked about this, but I want to narrow down a bit. So, I think even without the iOS changes, this whole like vertical integration was already happening, this movement. But now that it has happened, I'm kind of curious what you think about just like the mobile gaming landscape, because from what I've seen just through like LinkedIn or news updates in the last 3 years, is there aren't there's not that many. It seems like there's not that many targets out there left, but they, like, Zynga is still making big acquisitions, like billions of dollars. So like, why is there just like not enough new companies coming out? Is it just because of the user acquisition being so high? Like, let's say I want to start a mobile game company, I would need to, I don't even think like a seed round, like a $2 million seed round, I could pay for some engineers, I could pay for some designers and whatnot, but like, how do I afford to even market my game?
It's tough, and there's thousands of developers that are kind of at that below the line level, and I would put anybody that's doing maybe $1 million to $2 million a month in revenue at that level, that are in that same predicament. And what happens is they ultimately, because acquisition costs are so high, because you basically find yourself in a situation where you just can't have that longer payback window or that longer earn back window of whatever your game is trying to do. So what happens is you have bigger companies like a Machine Zone back in the day that was using 1 to 2 year earn back windows. So that means that they can just spend and be that much more aggressive on the user acquisition side. A more indie developer that's doing in that 1 to 2 million range might only be able to use a 30-day earn back window, because ultimately what happens is, with your company specifically, they basically are spending and buying ads on one side of the fence, waiting for, or let's use Google, for example, spending ads with Google and paying in one side of the ecosystem, while they're waiting for them to get paid on the monetization and the IAP and the other side of the ecosystem. And ultimately, a lot of them ultimately go into collections on one side as they wait, and they're playing essentially an accounting game, because it's right pocket, left pocket, just to keep their game at a sustainable level. And if they actually had deeper pockets, and at that point, you're probably talking about a 25 million plus round to actually be able to extend that window long enough for you to have an impact. It's just hard for the VCs and the investors to take that leap of faith that your game is actually ready. So your game either has to really succeed out of the gate, and then it's not a problem, and you're just off and running, and your kind of the risk profile is reduced and it's a lot less, or you're kind of more of that grinder dev that just has to kind of keep at it in hopes of just finding that one developer or that one publisher that just likes the team, likes the game, likes that you've been continuing to add some new and unique features, and they can start to see the writing on the wall and see that the retention is there, and know that if you just drop an extra 10 million on UA, that it's actually going to extrapolate and hold up, so that they will see return over time.
Thank you.
All right, John, you got what you needed?
For now.
Yes,
thank you. Yeah.
Well, no, I have a couple of questions percolating in my brain. It might feel you guys have been a talking shop on the leafy level, not the branch or the forest, and I wonder, just help me get some background on some of the terms in general. I hear growth marketing. I also hear performance marketing. And then you hear terms like paid media and CRM thrown around. If you can just help me establish the framework a little bit.
Yeah, so for me, performance marketing is very specific to media and spend, or at minimum, kind of your traditional, click-based traffic, or even TV or some type of conversion mechanism. Where growth for me specifically encompasses the performance side of media, but it really takes a much more macro level view at the full funnel, looking at all the individual lanes that a customer can actually arrive at your product. So paid, it for me is one lane, and you want to, for me, paid always splits up between, brand and advertising that's really designed to improve awareness. And I do think that brand and performance spend work hand in hand. I've always been a believer in that. I think kind of spending 7 years at a Disney kind of makes me appreciate the storytelling of brand and the reason why you would do brand. And even at Machine Zone, who Gabe was notorious for saying that brand advertising is dead, until the day he finally tried brand advertising and realized that, oh shit, I've actually been leaving a ton of money on the table by not doing brand advertising, and potentially overspending on performance because my awareness was so low and I had to do every single thing grindy to get a customer to convert. So the first Super Bowl commercial he runs, they basically just saw a massive spike in installs, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, brand actually works. So the paid media is always kind of one lane within the funnel. Then you have all of your earned tactics, and how do you measure those? How do you measure PR? How do you measure featuring on an app store? How do you measure some in-kind partnership? And partnerships is kind of another big bucket for me within that funnel. How are you doing those things and those tactics and those techniques and the relationship building that it takes to earn you some of those additional impressions in media and marketing activations and those types of things? And then you got your organic and your viral side of things, and how are you measuring those? So for me, growth as a discipline is about fully understanding what are all the levers that you can pull, in addition to not just thinking about it as paid media. So is there a piece of technology that you can recommend a developer include in their game because you know that it's going to translate to additional sharing out of the game? And Facebook Connect is one of those features that's a great example of how that kind of impacts virality and what that did early on within the Facebook games era and the early days of mobile. What are some of those other things that you can do? What is all the optimization around landing pages, and what does that customer journey look like? And there's multiple paths that customers can take, and there's not one size that fits all. And when you start to add in regions and geography and the localization and the assets and all those types of things, to me, that's what really distinguishes purely just the performance marketing kind of discipline from somebody that really is thinking about growth as a entire kind of discipline. And it's still changing. That's what it means for me, and that's what I fight for when I talk about growth. Is really that full funnel experience and that full funnel kind of management in terms of what are you doing in addition to just the paid and the spend, to make sure that you are able to meet your goals, able to potentially optimize against something that nobody else ever saw, and really build that relationship between marketing and dev, or marketing and product. So you do have that kind of hand-in-hand relationship, so that you're bringing something to the table because you're opening their eyes to looking at the problem in a very different way than how they look at the problem. And to me, that's what makes a good growth marketer, is somebody that really kind of straddles both of those sides, where if you just purely are a performance marketer, you're kind of, in my opinion, you're really just focused on paid media in a lot of ways. Where for me, a full kind of stack growth marketer really understands the true nuances of funnel management and optimizing that experience for customers.
As you talk about all of the different surfaces and all of the different territories, you're fleshing out that exact kind of logic puzzle that you were alluding to, Loving, before, like the great Rubik's Cube of it all. You are coming onto you had a multi-decade career in this area. You're coming onto teams at a pretty high level. In these fields, what do the entry level positions look like? And do you have any advice for people who are looking to get where you are or break in?
Yeah, I mean, I've hired people from multiple disciplines. I've had financial analyst switchers that just kind of were, not very happy, just number crunching because it wasn't that creative, and they just weren't really feeling fulfilled. I've had accountants. I've had, investment bankers that have wanted to jump over to marketing, and I've had people that have just, started regular careers as a marketing coordinator, as a marketing analyst, or engineers as well. Growth engineers have been around for a while. A lot of what I've talked about kind of lived in the engineering side of things very early on in kind of this latest generation of startups. So, I think anything where you're analytical in nature, and like my background, I'm not a math major, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a finance major, but psychology, especially at Cal, is very research based and very much founded in stats. A lot of the schooling and everything that I went through was still very math heavy. Any of those types of roles are really going to set you in a really good foundation to bring that kind of curiosity, bring that analytical thinking. If you are that type of a thinker, I think you're going to make a really good growth marketer with some good kind of mentorship and training along the way, because you're really going to ask the different questions than traditional folks are going to answer. If you just come from the creative marketing discipline, and you're really just focused on the creative side of it without thinking about the performance or the conversion or the growth angle of it, you're really missing a big chunk of the equation. So that's why I kind of, when I look and when I work with recruiting and talk about kind of the things I'm looking for in my next growth marketers, a lot of them that are working with me for the first time get really surprised that I'm so flexible in terms of where I want them to really explore and really challenge them to think out of the box. Because for me, I think there's a lot of good thinkers out there that would make awesome growth marketers that may not have even thought about growth marketing as a discipline in terms of what that means longer term for their careers.
Yeah, when you were talking about math heavy psychology and like other words for data driven marketing, right?
Totally. It blends consumer and the analytical side into, and that's why for me it kind of made sense that advertising was a logical next step, because it was very much consumer behavior and perception and how do people think about products, and what is that psychology around what makes them buy one thing over the other, and what do they think they need, or whatever it may be. So it was very, very, very much aligned to actually apply something that typically most people don't really apply their degrees to their professional life.
Right. Well, and speaking of giving advice to people who are pursuing this kind of a path, you've been at startups or smaller companies. You've also been at major companies that you're joking or small companies. Benefits of working on one side of the aisle or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of, I definitely appreciate the experience of doing both. You just become, working at a big company has its own challenges. There's the politics, there's the inefficiencies in a lot of ways, just because the companies are so big, where the startups and the smaller companies just force you to be a little bit scrappier, force you to roll up your sleeves. I think that's a big challenge with marketing in general, is that as people kind of grow in their careers, they become less hands-on, where I don't really care what level you are. If you can't literally spin up your own Facebook campaign, you're probably not going to get hired on my team. I want you to be hands-on. Not that that's going to be required on your day-to-day, but I want to know that you can jump in and do it if it comes to that. So that's kind of what you start to learn when you start to work at a startup, is that you just have to wear multiple hats. And when I got to B-Spot and was hired as a chief marketing officer, and quickly realized that nobody was paying attention to the actual front end of the product because it was an engineering team that was just focused on the back end. I ended up picking up the CPO title just because nobody else was doing it. So I was basically dual pathing the product with the marketing team because it just needed to be done. So you just don't get that type of experience working for a big company only. That being said, being able to succeed and grow at a big company is also a challenge. And for myself, going from a manager to a director at Disney within a handful of years, being lucky enough to have been promoted at Amazon, there's definitely some self reward that comes from that, and some appreciation, but it also is part of kind of just growth minded kind of professionals, just kind of instills that kind of just discipline, instills that commitment, instills that need to build those relationships and trust to get people to go to bat for you to make that happen, which is also something that I think is necessary if you do want to become an entrepreneur longer term, because you start to gain an appreciation for the mentorship and the growth, and really the things that are a little bit harder to really realize and learn at a startup, because everybody's just kind of running around. That you for people that have only done startups, it is a little bit tougher for those folks to get into a more traditional managerial role, because they've never really been forced to manage. They might be decent operators and be able to just get shit done, but if you're really looking for them to being a true manager of people, and a lot of times that I've seen, at least, it just doesn't work that well. So that's kind of where I think it's really good to experience both, because you start to learn really the people side, the managerial skill set working at big companies, of how you kind of can build a big company on your own. And I think kind of, John and in kind of thinking about kind of how Zuck started and where he was able to hold on to it. But I think he would probably acknowledge that not having that potentially created some friction or ripples or whatnot along the way, because he just didn't have that expertise.
That's a good point. It's so funny, because I think sometimes in your different stages of your career, you think you know a lot, but you kind of know nothing. So, I'll just talk about myself. So after my MBA, I don't know why, I just thought I was like hot shit, but I wasn't. And I just didn't know much about, I was a product manager. I didn't know much about product management. Like, I just never got the formal training. And I was working at Riot Games, which is a startup, and they don't have formal training. It's just more, product manager is just basically go do whatever that needs to be done, which is okay, but it's like I was missing the craft. And I actually remember, on this point about Zuck, one of my mentors was a CFO, and now he's a president of Riot Games. And he gave me a good piece of, I guess, like, it's like advice slash observation, because the founders of Riot Games were essentially also like in their mid-20s when they started, and they maintained their role. So he's like, look, John, first of all, startups are super hard, like, to succeed, and I'm glad Riot Games succeeded. But on top of that, if you're like a startup CEO of we don't know if it's successful yet, and then when you become successful, you're kind of like a mid-stage company. It's like a lot of people don't survive that transition. So the narrative that people think, oh, you're the startup founder, and then you stay, kind of like even Spiegel too, right? Like, I just saw I think he just turned 31. I mean, good for him. And he's been a publicly traded company CEO for so many years. So these are just like the rarest of the rare. Not only did they strike it good in their first attempt, then they like matured enough or maybe committed mistakes that we don't know about, and they got there, right?
Well, the smart folks brought seasoned people to surround themselves with. So again, there's ways to accommodate and ways to kind of make it work. But again, I think the balance and building a traditional career, that the 99% are going to have to do, really thinking about that balance in terms of coming from both, because you will get a stigma if you just work big company life. If you decide to go to a startup later in your career, you're always going to get questioned about, can you actually succeed in a startup? Versus like myself, I've done both. Going into an Amazon that appreciates an entrepreneurial spirit, they want folks that have worked at startups before, because each teams are scrappy, and that's kind of the culture of the company itself. You start to just be able to explain a lot of these transitions a little bit more, and your background becomes a lot more balanced in that regard. So to me, that's why, like, if you're thinking about career wise, and you can definitely do a startup, figure that side of it out, but don't be afraid to join a big company, because there's a ton to learn within those environments. There's a ton of both professional benefits as well as financial benefits. I mean, I think that's the other big portion of my career, and I've been totally thankful to have been come in at the right times at a lot of these companies. People think that the only way to really get that big bump financially is to join a startup early on, hopefully go public, or hopefully get an exit to get that big that big payoff. But I joined Disney in 2005 and our stock price was $33. I have most of my equity still, and we're sitting at $185. At Earthlink, they had their big increase, 80 plus dollars, dropped back down to $7. I came in right at that time. And even though when I left, it wasn't a big change, but you're still building equity. And then I don't have to, I've been at Amazon for 4 years. People can do the math. It definitely has been a good financial decision for me, in addition to professional. So I think if the more that folks like myself talk about that, I think it also changes the thinking about financially also, that there is opportunity to grow that side of what might be important to a lot of folks, by working at a big company as well.
Well, and professional experience in general, regardless of your industry, it could be so chicken or the egg, right? What you need, in order to get experience, you need experience.
Yep.
And so anybody DJs at a certain point, do you want to go for a startup or a smaller company where earlier on in your career, you can get the experience, you can get that bigger seat at the table,
Totally.
Use that to then leverage a leadership position at a bigger company, use
Totally.
that experience to get a bigger, and you ping pong back and forth.
Precisely. And I think the folks that have managed that side of it have been the ones that I think are kind of, again, leveling themselves up, to use a gaming term, because they've learned that balancing it out is actually beneficial. And then obviously you need strong mentors and strong leaders. And again, this can come from either side of the fence along the way. Both startup and big companies, there's a ton of bad managers out there, and if you unfortunately get stuck behind one of them, that's not gonna help your career that well as either. So really making sure that you're making the right decisions, making sure that you've got good sensibility in terms of the people that you're going to be working with and for, is also important. And I've been thankful that I've had a lot of good mentors along the way, folks that I still talk to from jobs that I've had 3 or 4 jobs ago. Just people that, again, it becomes about a personal relationship at that point, because they do appreciate what you brought to the table. You did start to have more, just more deeper understanding about backgrounds and where you come from, and why you think the way that you do, and work the way that you do, and you just get an appreciation for that along the way.